بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. ربنا لقد ظلمنا أنفسنا ولا غافل لذنوبنا أنت ثبت أقدامنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا واحفظنا واهدنا وارزقنا بحسن الخاتمة ونصلي ونسلم على النبي الذي أرسلته ليبين لنا القرآن وليكون قدوة لنا. أما بعد, when we begin to look at the situation around us and when we begin to look at the world around us, the situation that we're in personally and the situations that we're in as families, as communities, as a society, all of those situations are somehow tied together. And when you keep going further out, you see how those realities even are tied into the world. The world is a place where things are very much interdependent. What goes on in one place will affect what goes on in another place. There's no doubt that there's a level of breakdown that we haven't seen in the form that we're seeing now. And a lot of people are concerned and worried. And so one of the things that has been told to us by studies and analyses and so on and so forth is that there are some changes that are coming, and that those changes will bring about a disruption of the world as we knew it. There's some serious environmental challenges that we're facing as a human community and within the environment. There is clearly a problem with things like water, clean water, sustainable agriculture. There is a number of issues like housing, mortality rates, there's diseases, there's a number of different issues that we confront. But a lot of times what's happening is that, especially when we start talking about people that are directly impacted by these things, is that we're not really thinking about how can we address these things from a solution orientation, which will require of us a change in lifestyle. And so my proposal is that we're going to have to start to imagine another world. We're going to have to start to imagine possibilities, right? Because we see the situations as they are. We see the problems as they are. But one of the issues that's happening is that there's the short term and the long term. So in the short term, we're trying to deal with the situation that's right in front of us. But we're not thinking about the long term and where are we going to go. One interesting, we can draw a number of different examples, but I want to draw this one example. One thing that we can learn from the Southeast Asian community, especially the Indians and the Pakistanis, is that there was a heavy focus as a community on inserting themselves in certain types of educational fields to achieve certain types of professionalities or certain types of professions. And, there is something to be said for a strategic planning. And I mentioned this some years back. I mentioned it periodically. That community shows us that if you change a certain value within your practice, within your families, that the whole community begins to move, right? And this is something that some of the brothers who are leaning heavily on conservatism this is one of the things that they're trying to claim, right? And there's some legitimacy to that position, that we have to look at what it is that we're doing as individuals, what it is that we're doing on the spiritual level, what is it that we're doing on the mental level. They don't, go necessarily to that extent. And how are you, what are your decision making processes like? What are your actions like? And so that example of that community, for instance, of saying that we're going to go into these fields as a community, that if you want to marry into our community, and they're talking about marrying within themselves, that, you have to have this standard in place. It has its problems, but it also has its benefits. And I'm not here to talk about going into computer science or being a doctor or being an engineer, that type of thing, because that's not the goal of the example, to bring up what you can achieve by going to be a doctor or going to be an engineer or computer scientist, that type of thing. No, that's not the aim here. The aim is to say that, look at that community when they decided as individuals, as families, as a jama'ah in general, as a community, to agree to that, then that put the community in a position where everyone is going into a certain realm together. In other words, it allowed them to create change. If we were to take that same model as a Muslim community, or as a Latino community, or an African American community, or a Palestinian community, the same thing that we learn from the Indian and Pakistani community, if we were to take that example, what was done on the level of what kind of education do you get because they wanted to achieve a certain economic goal, if we were to use that same concept and apply it to different things, like that, as a community, we agree that we need X amount of scientists. We need, X amount of people with a degree in business management. We need X amount of teachers. If we were to focus and organize ourselves on those levels where we're thinking, what can we do to benefit ourselves as communities? And that's what the job of government. Government does that, right? Government impacts education. Government says funds have to go here. Government says funds have to go there. But there's a lot of change that we can achieve outside of governmental systems, if it was that we organized ourselves and we had those objectives to organize around, and we had the values necessary for organization. There's a lot that we could achieve. The Muslim community and outside of the Muslim community, people need to envision another world, another set of possibilities. The problem that I find is that the people that are doing that, like when you start to do that, people downplay that. But the people that are doing that are those who have developed the ability to generate wealth for themselves. Like, for instance, like a Elon Musk. Elon Musk is talking about interplanetary existence, Star Wars, in other words. And you have to realize that those ideas don't come out of a vacuum. There was, before you can achieve that concept of Star Wars, there already were ideas that were being discussed in myths and religion and so on and so forth in order to open up to that type of concept. In other words, there was some preparation that was being made on multiple levels before that idea can become a possibility, right? That's something that we have to really understand and consider. There was a generation that was soaking those ideas up, right, in popular culture with the Jetsons and comic books and everything that goes along with that. This is part of the problem that we have as a community, that we don't soak up the ideas and the visions that are necessary for us to envision the possibility of another world. We're stuck on just the routine of where it is that we fall in the system. But we're not envisioning another world. And that goes for how we do the masjid, or how we do how we function as a community. It doesn't only have to be the masjid, because my audience is not just only Muslims. My audience is more than Muslims. And so how we organize ourselves and how we organize our lives. Like, for instance, the issue of family life, how we organize family life. Right now, one of the biggest causes of divorce, it is the debate about the traditional family role. Knowing well that the economy, as it is, has disrupted the traditional family role. Right? That's something that you have to really understand. If we're going to envision another world, if we're going to envision the future, then we need to be able to start to look at ourselves in different ways. Just focus on the family as an example. Part of the issue of the family maintaining itself, it is the issue of the traditional family roles. Well, the traditional family roles depended upon in the past primarily the man being the breadwinner, and the woman will stay at home with the children. The economics behind that type of concept, in order for you to achieve that traditional family role, you would have to have some sort of strategy that will allow men to go into certain economic trajectories, whether in business or in education or whatever it may be, to be able to maintain an income that will allow a traditional family role. So there will have to be prep work that's done prior to marriage as a community in order for that traditional family role to be maintained. And that's part of the problem that we have, is that, we're debating about so many different things, but we're not really looking at what does it mean to maintain certain things. Like the traditional family. Does the traditional family role, can it be maintained solely with the issue of a man making X amount of dollars? What about the values? What about when you get a woman who is independent in her thinking, or she has a career? How can you, in other words, this is part of the issue that we're having. Look, the traditional family, as we claim it to be, and as we try to interpret religiously as being the family, in reality is not existent. I'll say it again. In reality, that traditional family that we claim is Islamic or is Christian or is this, with the man at the base, is non-existent. Why? Because when we look at, for instance, let's just use the Islamic prism. When we look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first marriage that he goes into is the marriage with Khadija. Who was Khadija? Khadija was his elder in age. She was previously married. She had wealth. Is that a traditional family? She had more money than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is that a traditional family, the way that we're painting it to be? Or is this a family in which the woman actually is in a stronger position than the man on multiple levels? That's one. That was one of the Prophet's marriages. Another of the Prophet's marriages is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was married to Aisha. Was there an age difference? Is that a traditional family in the way that we understand it? Another thing is that there was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He married a woman who had come out of the Jewish religion. And so, in other words, there was some cultural differences. Is that the traditional family concept as we understand it? If you look at the lives of the prophets, alayhimus salam, you're going to find in the lives of the prophets things that overlap with the reality of where we're at in life. But if you look at religiosity and sometimes religious teaching, and I'm not talking about revelation, I'm talking about the way that people think about religion. You're going to find sometimes that the way that people think about religion, even if it may be scholarly, is not always representative of the liberation trends that are there in revelation itself. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ gave us a number of different examples of how to do family life, not just one example. Another thing occurs, like you have in Islamic history, the companions or the disciples of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Didn't you have an example of a woman picking her husband, even converting her husband, Sulaim with Talha? Didn't she pick him? Didn't she convert him? That's not a traditional family organizational setup in terms of how we understand. That's a setup where it is a setup where it has some dynamicism to it. It's closer to what we need in today's time than what we have. And so we have to reimagine on how we're doing family life in light of our values, not in light of what we say our values are. Because what people are saying their values are in some cases is that, like in the traditional family structure, the children don't have an opinion. I tutored some years back in English some brothers from Saudi, and they complained about that psychologically, how they would sit with their elders and they wouldn't be heard. They were not allowed to be those who had a voice in the halaqah or in the circle. Sometimes within the traditional family structure, one person will dominate to the extent that everyone else has no identity, has no position. And it doesn't necessarily have to just be a male. It could be a grandmother. She just completely dominates. And what she says goes. And so, that's something that we have to really think about. We have to reimagine if we're going to deal with some of our issues and move forward. When we start talking about problems in the family, the reason why a lot of these issues are not dealt with and they won't be dealt with is that we're trying to adjust to a world, and we're trying to adjust to an idea, and the two clash versus being dynamic. The two clash. We don't feel comfortable. So there is internally a fight between the male and the female when it comes to the family structure and how things should be. And we see in the prophetic example a different concept. And so that will call us into question the whole concept of how we understand manhood and womanhood. And again, we said we're talking within the boundaries of the tradition. We're not talking outside. We're talking about within the boundaries of revelation. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he cooked and cleaned in the home. That was known. But at the same time, you know what I'm saying? There's also an example of women having their own business. But at the same time, they maintained the dynamics of how they work together. It wasn't necessarily a clash 100%, although sometimes there was some clashes that's based on normal circumstances when it comes to, the male and female dynamics. So we're going to have to start envisioning on another level. The same thing when it comes to the family is going to be intertied to how we think about each other, how we think about life as individuals, how we think about economy, and what are our values. What is it that we give primacy to? Is it just making wealth? Because the world is changing. The dynamic is changing. And that's what, the Muslims in the U.S. have not envisioned a world where as communities, we have it set up where we're able to work and pray 5 times a day as a community. We haven't envisioned that for ourselves as a world. As a matter of fact, we have written that out. Everyone is talking about preserving Islam, but we're not envisioning that as a possibility. Not until that discussion is not a main topic. Whereas, for instance, 20 years ago, within the African American community, like some of the brothers from Jamaat Tabligh or Tablighi Jamaat, that's what they push, that you shape your life according to your values in Islam, not just accommodate and adapt. Although that has its benefit and this has its benefit. Shaping and accommodating. Shaping and accommodating. Shaping reality so that it conforms to your values, and then also accommodating. Both have their pluses and minuses. The deen allows us to be flexible. But what I'm trying to say to you is that, look at where our thinking is at. How are we really imagining other possibilities? This is why we're not leading in the world. Because we're just conforming. We're not adapting for strategically. We're just conforming. This is why we're not leading in the world. We don't present to the world possibilities for other realities, for other futures. And again, like we talk about the concept of the family, we have to realize that within the idea of the family, because of male-female dynamics and how things have operated historically, a lot of people don't want to get married. They look at the family as being something that ties you down unnecessarily. They look at, for instance, marriage as being that which imprisons you. That means we have not done a good job of teaching what it is that Islam says about, marriage. So we can allow society to have a different possibility in how they deal with things. The same thing is the issue to be said when it comes to the issue of abortion. We haven't taught society what it is that Islam says on abortion. Because if we talk about what Islam says on abortion, it will remove the polarization that's there on the issue of abortion. In order for us to talk about what Islam says about abortion, we have to envision ourselves differently in the way that we participate in society. The way that we talk about mental health. We don't talk about the function of having to take breaks throughout the day, aside from the 2 legal breaks, to meditate, or what we call to pray make salah. We don't present that to society as an idea, as a concept, so that society envisions a different possibility. So while people like Elon Musk are talking about a future of intergalactic travel type of thing, and being connected to computers like being cyborgs, in half of the community having a discussion about whether we're going to be chipped or not, it shows that we're just conformists to the reality as it is. We're not envisioning a world where we have a say, where we shape history, where we present another possibility. And I'm not talking about the fanatical possibilities that some religious characters, and I'm not necessarily talking about Muslim, because I'm not talking about deen. I'm talking about religiosity, how people imagine their religiosity to be. We're not talking about these restrictive environments that are just restrictive for the sake of being restrictive because we're scared of everything in the world. Because there's no growth in that. When we look at the historical reality of Muslims, even though there were mistakes, when you look at Al-Andalus represented possibilities for the human being. People flourished in Al-Andalus as human beings. It wasn't just an orientation of rigid religiosity without any growth intellectually. An educational system, a possible educational system to imagine, because we don't have it right now, is one in which you have the highest scientific endeavors, and it's complemented by the highest understandings of religion. That was Al-Andalus, where there was no clash between religion and science, not what you had seen historically in Europe. But we ourselves nowadays, we're clashing between those who want scientific progress and those who want morality. That brings you into the issue of research and what you can do in research and what you can't do in research. We're not imagining a world where we actually are historical agents. And what that means is similar to the concept in which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, in which Allah is saying, I am establishing a vicegerent in the world, a khalifa in the world. And I'm not talking about the political idea of khilafah. I'm talking about the Quranic concept of the human being. We know that the human being has a distinct position. That's why we can have Elon Musk talking about the possibility of living between two planets. And they're talking about even going to Mars. Before, Kennedy was talking about going to the moon. A world of possibilities. This is the time where we imagine a world of possibilities. The Quran teaches us that the human being has the ability to dominate in the earth. Dominate in the universe to some extent, with its limitations. And so the issue that, I want to start closing this live is saying that we are stuck in a time where there's a lot of issues that are taking place, a lot of problems. But we're not imagining the world as being open to possibilities. We're not imagining the world as being open to possibilities. This is extremely important. Because if we can imagine possibilities, then we begin to have hope. Hope is tied into that reality. That things can change in a different direction. If we can imagine other possibilities to things, then we can begin to have the energy that is necessary to go in that direction. That's the same thing with yourself. If you find yourself in a jam with yourself, where you find yourself undermining yourself, if you can envision yourself in another state of being, in an optimal state of being, if you can envision yourself growing in certain areas, then it's more likely that your psychology is going to help you work to get into that area, because you're creating the conditions in your mind mentally for that. As a community, we have not envisioned possibilities on other levels. And that's where we have to deal with the challenges of mental lockdown. And so while these people are talking about colonizing space, we're sitting here debating with each other about this point and that point, and not imagining the world of possibilities so that we actually do initiate change. That's the same thing like we said, the lifestyle. Like, how are we talking about the lifestyle of the Muslim or the non-Muslim or anyone that wants to grow? What kind of lifestyle is there? If we're not imagining the world outside of how we think about it. Imagine your life outside of the 9-to-5 paradigm. Imagine your life where you have the ability to choose what comes first on your agenda. Imagine your life where you have the ability to integrate your practice of the deen into your daily practice. Where you get the best of every world that's possible. Imagine the best of every world that's possible. And you work through all of those things and you bring that into your life. I'm trying to disrupt the thinking that we have. And I'm not trying to motivate like a CEO Fortune 500 concept. Because this is not about having growth for the sake of achieving money, for making capital, because we have the idea that if I can make $1 million, then I can have the life that I want. This is imagining a world where capital is not at the center. Right? Is imagining a world where the 50, 40 to 60 hour work week is not the work week. Is imagining the world in a completely different light. Why is it that you allow an Elon Musk to come, use tax dollars even? And he's talking about interplanetary travel. He's talking about connecting you to a computer and making you like a cyborg, transhuman reality. But you can't envision the world, right, in another light, oh Muslims, oh people in general, right? Again, because we said the audience is not just Muslims. We're dealing with others. I'm dealing with my own Puerto Rican community. A world without the Jones Act. A world of a free Puerto Rico. You know, why is it that we're not imagining that possibility, reshaping? Right now, whether you like it or not, there's been studies that are being put out. I just read about 2 or 3 studies this morning. The world after COVID, how it's going to change. People are already thinking about the world with other possibilities. That's what I want you to think about. The world with another possibility, another set of possibilities. Our relationships to each other with another set of possibilities, right? Our family life with another set of possibilities. Our dealing with people with another set of possibilities. And we already said that, you know, we're informed by our religious orientation or Islam, but we cannot afford to just have rigidity of religiosity versus the freedom of the deen. Because the deen sometimes will give us multiple courses of action, but we ourselves in our religiosity, we pick one. It's like if you go to Hajj, you make the pilgrimage to Mecca, and you stand on the mountain of Arafat. You can stand on the mountain of Arafat at the top, at the middle. You can be at the bottom. You can be in a range. There's multiple things that you can do. Yeah, the optimal thing is to pray Salah at the beginning of the time. That's the optimal. But Islam allows for you to pray Salah within that range of time. It may be the case that you may be traveling. So Islam will allow for you to combine your Salah. You can combine your Salah. You can pray it at the beginning of the time, or pray close to the end of the time, or within the middle of the time. You see, the deen is the one that's flexible, not the people. You will have some people will come in and say, no, we can only practice this, we can't practice that. The question is, what is the range of practices that are allowable? Because that allows you to have possibility. What are the things, what is the range that can be done in a world which is pressing us? It's not a compromise in the deen. Unless we start to begin to think that way, what are the possibilities of action that are legitimate, that are good for our growth? Unless we start thinking like that, we're going to be people that are collapsed. Because we don't control the possibilities as they're being implemented right now. We're not even talking about that. The Muslims are nowhere to be seen on the stage influencing anything or engaged in anything. And a lot of us, even outside of the Muslim community, we're in a situation where we're just going day by day, check by check. You know, we're locked into a system that is not promoting our growth and our health. It is sad that you find a lot of people following people like Elon Musk, but they themselves can't envision a world of possibilities. Their intellect and the imagination is locked down. I'm closing with saying this. Imagination is extremely important for your mental health. Imagination is important for creativity. Imagination is important for being solution oriented. Imagination, it gives you the ability to collaborate with others because you can think outside of the box. If you can't imagine alternatives, then you're not experiencing the fullness of life of being a human being. Because one of the features of being a human being is that ability to imagine on multiple levels and then to work to bring that to be a reality. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.